We have a gate! So it was a pretty productive month from a gardening standpoint, which is funny to say because nothing's really growing yet since our last frost date isn't for another 3 weeks. But I still consider it a productive month because I have a lot of prep work that was accomplished. And hopefully doing all of this work ahead of time will help with the maintenance when it is actually time to plant things. So it's not going to look that different in many ways from my video last month, but there is a lot that has gone into just the prepping of my actual growing beds. And I mentioned in my last video that I am more of a fan of no-till gardening. I did not rototill any of these beds. I did hand till with a shovel, kind of hand turned them, some of them. Some of them I've been strictly just layering, kind of lasagna garden style, and some of them I am really just mulching and covering with plastic and planting into the existing soil under the sod. So I'll kind of give you an example of each of those. So typically when you have just a grass yard that you want to turn into a garden plot, most people will do one of two things. They'll either rototill it like crazy to break up all of that sod and turn it kind of into the soil beneath it, or they will bring in new soil and add it on top, either in raised beds or kind of covering the sod and then putting the new soil on top. I didn't go either of those routes because I'm not a fan of rototilling. I just don't like messing up with the soil structure in that aspect if I don't have to. And the reason why I didn't bring in all new soil is because our native soil here is good and it's worth building on, but also just because of the size of the garden, it wasn't really financially realistic. I think I had calculated that I would have to spend, it was like $1,200 to bring in enough soil to cover all of the new beds that I'm establishing. So I did end up buying a little bit of soil for some areas, but for the most part, I'm just building up on top of the sod in various ways. So these two beds were both built differently. This perimeter bed, I put down cardboard and old bedding from our chicken coop right on top of it. And this perimeter bed is mainly going to be growing pumpkins. So it doesn't require a lot of actual growing space as far as root system goes. When I'm going to plant the pumpkins in a couple of weeks here when frost is gone, I'm just going to dig in through the straw, dig through the cardboard, and plant my pumpkins directly into the dirt that's underneath the sod, maybe with a little scoop of compost just to kind of help get it going. But this bed wasn't worth tilling up just because it doesn't need a lot of root space. These two beds have potatoes planted in them already, and I did hand till with a shovel, just kind of turned the sod over and made 2 trenches along the side, put my potatoes in the trench, loosely covered with dirt, and then just heavily mulched it with this old hay that was left in the barn from probably a decade ago. I think I have a picture of the trenches before I dug them. Let me see if I can show you guys that. This bed has our onions, which you can see they are sprouting, and pretty soon they will get mulched after they get weeded. I just was waiting for them all to sprout. This bed, I actually put down a layer of dirt. It is just topsoil from a different part of the farm, and it does have mulch underneath it to help suppress the grass. And then I put about 4 inches of soil. This bed right here, as you can see, has landscape fabric on it. It had about the same amount of straw or hay as the potato beds had. And then I did put about 4 inches of compost that I bought on top of the hay, and now it has landscape fabric because this is going to be our pepper bed, and it doesn't get planted for another month now. So I just don't want any weeds to grow out of the compost until then. Probably will just put holes in this and plant the peppers directly in them and see how I like that. I've never used landscape fabric before, so just kind of experimenting to see what I think about it. As you can see, we got 3 of the 4 raised beds in, and 2 of the 3 are planted. I'll talk about those in a minute though. This perimeter bed up here kind of got a combination of layers. So originally I had a thick layer of leaves down, and then I had some topsoil that I had taken out of another garden bed that I put on top of the leaves, and then I actually ended up putting cardboard down and putting a bunch of wood chips on top of it, which you can see. I just didn't feel confident about the quality of the topsoil and the amount of weeds that were going to come out of it, so that's why I decided to do cardboard after the fact. This is going to be more of a perennial bed, so I used wood chips thinking that it's not going to get tilled in and broken down quickly, but I probably will have, well, I do have some brassicas planted in here already, and I just kind of cut through the cardboard, put in a scoop of compost, and planted those into that topsoil, and there'll be eventually some flowers along the back, but that one probably has more layers than any other bed that I've done. Are you checking on them? Don't touch. Don't do it. Don't do it. You had to let them sprout. These 3 beds are going to be my tomatoes. I didn't get my trellises up yet, but those have another month until they'll go in. Unlike the pepper bed, these only have straw and then landscape fabric on them. When it's time to plant the tomatoes, I will literally just burn a hole and then use a post digger thing to get a really deep hole and plant my tomatoes directly into the dirt that's underneath this existing sod. And some of my amendments and things will go in there. But again, because tomatoes don't have a huge sprawling root system and they're really spaced out, I do mine about 3 or 4 feet apart. It wasn't worth it to me to put soil on this entire bed. Unlike the peppers, which those will be about 1 foot apart, they'll use more soil and they'll be more heavily planted. So that's why I went that route on these beds. Last of my long row here, as you can see, it has some of the compost that I bought. I bought about 8 yards of compost to use in my raised beds, and then the stuff I had left over I put on a couple of the long beds. This one is going to be brassicas and green beans, so it'll be things that are planted very closely together and that can use a lot of rich soil, so that's why I chose to put it on this bed. There is a really heavy layer of old hay underneath it to also be a weed barrier from the sod, and then I will do some type of mulching actually around the plants once it gets to that point. Most likely straw, just because it's easy to get in large quantities and it's affordable. All right, the next bed is another perimeter bed, and this one has the garlic, which you can see is doing awesome. Ended up doing cardboard and wood chips on this perimeter bed because, again, it's not something that I'm going to kind of turn in or break down. It's going to be, after this year, a lot of perennials, so I'm okay with doing wood chips as mulch in somewhere that I'm not going to be adding more layers of mulch on top of it each year. So this one has wood chips with cardboard, and I do have some brassicas here as well for now. At the end of that garlic bed is the asparagus, which is not coming up yet. I just planted fresh crowns. As they come up, then I'll pull over some of that topsoil that I have turned out, just kind of hand turned with my shovel to till it up, and cover it little by little, and then I'll do some type of mulch on this after that. The last perimeter bed is this long one at the end, closest to the barn. I'm so excited about this bed because I'm going to do sunflowers basically the entire length of it with, again, more squashes and like the big vining plants, just like I'm doing on that far perimeter bed. So it's not going to need a ton of root space because they're going to be really heavily spaced apart. So just like with that far bed, super thick layer of old hay that has been about 8 weeks since I put it down, and you can just see, like, I don't even know if you can see, there's like 3 blades of grass. Like there's some grass that's kind of starting to come through, but it's really suppressing the weeds super well. I will probably put another super thick layer of old hay down when it gets closer to planting time. And then again, when I'm going to seed all of my squashes and melons and vining things in this row next to the sunflowers, I'll just dig a hole in the straw, dig through the sod that's left, and put a little compost in the hole where my actual seed goes. And that will be more than enough because the roots don't take up a lot of space. So it's not worth amending that entire bed. Let's talk about the raised beds. This bed has already been planted. It has 20 strawberry plants in it. So those just got planted last weekend, and then I cardboarded and mulch around them. I decided to go to wood chips for mulch just because after asking some of my friends on Instagram, a lot of people were not a fan of having their strawberries in this type of landscaping fabric because the runners aren't able to root themselves. And my hope is that eventually I can separate the runners from this bed into another bed. And so wood chip seems like the best option for suppressing weeds, but still having that option later. But this will have cucumbers that are planted here in a couple weeks. And then there'll be another bed here that will also have cucumbers on this side. And this raised bed will mainly be my herbs. I love how the raised bed turned out. We pretty much paid nothing for them except for, I think we used like 4 2x4s for each one and ripped them down for 2x2s for the framing, but the rest is just heat treated pallet wood that was free. And I love the way that they look. I love the vertical boards. I think that they're pretty solid and they are going to work really well. So this bed on the left has carrots on one half, and then the other half has 2 different types of lettuce, spinach, and radishes, which you can see are starting to sprout. Definitely going to have to thin those, but radishes are always good to plant, even if you don't like them. They're just a confidence booster. And the lettuces are just starting to come up too. And the spinach over here. I didn't use the compost I bought in this bed because I'd already filled it, so it's not the best soil. You can see some cracks. It's a little bit heavier, but I think for what I've planted in there, it'll be fine. These little pots down here, I have Comfrey Cuttings that are sprouting. When they're up, I'll plant them just randomly all over the farm and use them to supplement animal feed, or just some nice hardy greenery even is nice. In this bed, you can see the sugar snap peas are starting to come up. And the reason why there's a little bit of a block right there is because I had filled this bed originally and it sunk so much, but I had already planted the snap peas. So I actually added the compost on this side of the trellis and then put wood chips on top of it. And the peas had already sprouted and I didn't want to take away their life, so I just put that barrier there. When they're done, I'll fill it in the rest of the way, and whatever next crop I put in there will be at the same level as the rest of the bed. So there's been a lot of mishaps so far in the garden. Rushing to do things, anxiously doing things, and then having to go back and redo them. But that's, I guess, a lesson to be learned over and over. I had filled this bed, like I said, and it sunk down. I had planted the carrots and the peas, and then it continued to sink down so much that I decided that I'm just gonna fill it back up and replant the carrots. So this one is mulched right now with wood chips on top of the compost, but I will replant carrots here in a few days and just kind of pull aside the mulch where I seed them. So my primary goal with this garden is definitely bulk food production, feeding our family in the summertime as much as possible, but also growing food that we can put up. So potatoes, tomatoes, things to make salsa, green beans, broccoli, things that will keep really well, onions and garlic. But because this is our future kitchen garden, or potager, if you would consider it that, I do want to have some perennials and flowers mixed in with all of the produce. So I have been trying to be mindful of what I put in this year to not take away from my productivity as far as growing food, but also being able to establish and enjoy the space. So you can see I did put in some perennials, flowers, and different things. I have a peony, I have a lilac, I have a hydrangea bush, I have some rhubarb that I transplanted, I have blueberries, just a couple things here and there to give it beauty and to get established for when it is more of like a kitchen garden. But again, just being mindful too of not taking up like productive space. Another thing I'll mention too is that I think it's important when you're having a garden, whether it's your first year or your 10th year, is that you really have to set a budget. I had set a budget for $500 for this new garden space, just because we have so much other infrastructure going into the farm, being our first spring and summer here. That was one reason why I couldn't just bring in all of the new topsoil for each bed. As of right now, I've spent about $580, and that includes all of my seeds, the compost, the fencing that went all the way around it, some mulch, whether it be fabric or straw, and the few materials that we needed for the raised beds. I bought some things that I wasn't planning to, like the lilac bush and hydrangea and blueberry bushes and things like that, but I could easily have spent $2,000 setting up this garden space with pristine beds and, you know, fully mulched paths versus grass, and a little more aesthetically pleasing fence. And, you know, that wasn't our priority this year. We wanted to make it good enough that it was an efficient growing space and that it did well. We didn't want to hinder its production, but also didn't want to give up certain other projects that we want to do on the farm. So one thing I'm kind of trying to battle with myself for my tomato trellises is whether or not I'm going to buy cattle panels. I like using cattle panels for trellising tomatoes a lot, and honestly they are pretty affordable when you consider their lifespan, which is basically indefinite. But I'm already over budget. So I do have, what? Are you shaking your head? I'm not over budget? Is that what you're saying? I do think that I'll end up buying them, just because they will make maintaining the tomatoes easier and more productive. And honestly, a lot of the money that I've spent this year in setting up the garden is going to be a one-time expense. I mean, I've spent maybe $100 to $150 on things like seeds and soil starting mix, like that one-time use stuff. The majority of what I spent went into perennials and fencing and raised bed materials And then if I do the cattle panels on top of that, all of that's still gonna be here next year. So it's worth it to spend more of my budget on those types of things. What do you have?
Flowers.
Those are beautiful dandelions. Do they smell good?
Yeah.
So pretty. So that's the garden as of the end of April, early May now. We still have a 3 to 4 week time before our frost threat is completely gone. So it'll be a while before a lot of stuff's going in the ground. And then really it won't be until the end of June until it's starting to green up in there. But a lot of prep work's being done and I think it's gonna be a good season. I'm excited. Thanks for watching.